up being a social worker.
Right.
Could you share some information in that area with me?
I can do that because I think I had worked as a high school and middle school student at Chinese hospital and in a medical laboratory. So I was all set to go into the biological sciences. But then during my first year of college, the YWCA had a summer program in New York City at the Bowery. So I lived in a settlement house for 6 weeks, and for the first time, you know, we came from a community where we were all poor, except that our life was so close and intimate. I don't think we thought of ourselves as poor, but our parents reminded us that we were poor all the time. Which means, according to Chinese tradition, you know, you pull yourself out of poverty and then you pull us along with you by getting a higher education, going into the professions, and being able to earn more money than we ever could. So that was the thought, go into biological sciences. But then when I lived at the Bowery and worked with lower income students, the other thing that the YWCA did in that student program was it took us around to different areas of New York, Manhattan and Brooklyn and the Bronx, to see housing projects, different kinds of social work organizations. And it sort of awakened in me the extent of human need. And of course, I'm sure it was latent in me all the time because we grew up in poverty. So it just awakened that. And so I decided, then I began to search, okay, I got to save the world. That was at age 18. You think you're going to save the world. And so how can I do it most quickest and most efficiently? And I stumbled upon social work. And so I took my upper division classes in social work and found the education very, very interesting. And my father said, I thought you were going into biological sciences. Nope, I'm going to save the world. So from there, when I went to grad school at Cal, then there was the choice of going into individual work, group work, or community organization. And again, my young mind said, okay, if I work with individuals, you're only reaching a few people at a time. But if you work with groups and you got skills in working with groups, you could save the world much faster. So that's the thinking process of a young kid. So I went into group work, and at that time, group work, Kurt Levine came up with a whole theory of group dynamics. And Cal had some very good instructors in group dynamics too. So my graduate work was in group work. However, we were also trained in community organization and individual work. I found my graduate work, my social work education so wonderful and enriching. And from Cal, I went to University of Minnesota to finish getting the master's degree. And so with a different set of faculty, that was even more stimulating and enriching. And at that time at Cal, the group work teachers were Dr. Gisela Konopka and Ruby Purnell. So I think I got a pretty good education there. in field work in St. Paul, Minnesota, in a settlement house with black people. And here this small Chinese woman, never having been exposed to black culture, it was frightening and eye-opening, and quite a challenge for me to adjust my thinking and cultural perspective, and a challenge to me to really live out the social work education, which is to accept and love and help achieve and to limit. I think the textbook used at that time for social workers was Wilson and Ryland. And that too was just such a basic textbook for group workers, very practical, as well as lots of theoretical understanding. So you can see what led me into the field.
And how you established the foundation. And then when you finished your graduate work, did you come back to California at that time?
Yes, we came back because we were not accustomed to the snow and icy conditions. We came home to California, came home to the Bay Area actually. And my first job was, of all things, with the Oakland Recreation Department. And I applied there because I'd heard that the superintendent of the Recreation Department was a woman that felt that social workers had a lot to contribute to the whole field of recreation work. So she was hiring social workers, and so I worked for the Oakland Recreation Department, let's see, in 3 different settings, doing group work. And I think, no, before that I was at Richmond, California, and I worked for the YWCA there, doing group work, working with young married couples, as well as going to the low-income housing project that was all black. And so that again expanded my experiences of working with people very different from myself.
And in the recreation department, what kind of group activities were you involved with?
In the recreation department, I think I was the leader of some club programs in North Oakland Recreation Center and at Mosswood Recreation Center. Then I was placed at Lincoln Center as the director. And Lincoln Center was a little clubhouse with ball courts. So I had 2 strapping men working with me, and they were the directors of outdoor activities with older teenagers. And I had groups of kids in the clubhouse, and then we would run out to the yard to play as well. So it was like Lincoln Center is located in the heart of Chinatown, but Spanish speakers live nearby. And so Spanish-speaking teenagers made it kind of their center. And then you had Chinese-speaking teenagers come in, and then Lincoln School is a grammar school, was just across the street. So there were kids, lots of Chinese, but lots of Spanish-speaking and blacks as well. So it was a diverse population.
Yes. So once again, you were exposed to the multiculturalism of
Yes.
of the area.
Yes. 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 And worked with, I think I've worked with immigrants, working with immigrants in groups to help them adjust to American life. And this was a broad range of immigrants as well. That was part of the program at the recreation center.
See, so it would be immigrants from Spanish-speaking countries,
Yes.
as well as
Chinese.
Chinese.
Yes. I think the Chinese didn't really participate because they wanted to stay with their own language. So it was everybody else except Chinese. And finally, we were homesick for San Francisco, so we moved back to San Francisco. And by then, I was pregnant with my first child, and while being pregnant with her, I simply worked in a part-time job as a social worker with deaf and hard of hearing children, and that was preschool kids that came in to be tested, and then had a little preschool program going on. I didn't work there very long because then I stopped to have my children, and I think I did not resume working until the kids were 9 years old. The first one was 9 years old. And their father, actually, 4 of us, our 2 children, and their birth father, and we went on an around-the-world trip. And in Yugoslavia, we had a tragic accident, and their father was killed instantly. So we came home, and I think I was lost for a bit there. And I finally decided I could do something that was useful. And I knew that there was a social work agency in Chinatown, Cameron House, that was a mission of the Presbyterian Church. And I had a very early connection with Cameron House because my mother, who died when I was 18 months old, was rescued from prostitution and lived at Cameron House. So talk about Freudian. I wandered back to Cameron House in my adulthood, and it became one of 2 Cantonese speakers who worked as social workers there. The other Cantonese speaker is a Caucasian woman. She was a missionary. She hired me because I was Chinese birth. I had a professional degree, and I could speak Chinese. And so that was kind of like then finding a niche that lasted for almost 18 years, working with Chinese-speaking people. And at that time, I was the only Chinese-speaking person with a professional degree who was of that same ethnic background. And that's because there were no jobs. And so people were going into the welfare department. In the first place, there were no jobs, and practically, I think, for a while there, no people of Chinese descent went into social work. And it was the war on poverty. Remember, Lyndon Johnson had the war on poverty. He had the Vietnam War raging, but some people say he had this war on poverty to gain goodwill. So one of the things I did was work with several men who were working on getting Chinatown to be a target area. See, that was how money was allocated, was if you proved a need in your community. So we wrote up the proposal, we did the research, we had practical experience already, we knew our people, so we succeeded on making Chinatown a target area, which meant this influx of money. And with that influx of money, then self-help for the elderly could be founded, Chinatown Child Development Center could be founded, Newcomer Service Center could be founded. Before these agencies were started, while working at Cameron House, I had to serve a range from little kids, parents with little kids, quarreling couples, in-law problems, elderly problems, medical problems, not only be the therapist, but a case manager and the chauffeur and the interpreter for this range of cases, because there was nowhere else to go. There were no other agencies. And with this influx of money from the war on poverty, that meant that other agencies could be founded. I no longer needed to work with the elderly. I no longer needed to work with the little kids. I no longer needed to work on immigration problems. And so I concentrated on working with women who were suffering from being violated and abused by their husbands. So that work in Chinatown started at that time. Vietnamese refugees were coming in. There was a higher incidence of refugees from Vietnam reaching out for help when the women were abused. The women reached out for help. Higher incidence than the Chinese speakers from China. I can't tell you whether that's because they were not reaching out for help or else whether there was a lower incidence. But that is now a going program at Cameron House. The other thing that I did was that then I joined with a group of medical people who were fearing that socialized medicine was going to come into Chinatown, that the government was going to set up socialized medicine, and that's going to threaten our solo practices. So I joined with a group of medical people to work toward getting an HMO, essentially, in Chinatown. It's called Northeast Medical Services. And so, being a radical social worker and completely opposed to solo practice and in favor of preventive medicine, I just stuck it out with them and kept needling them, kept putting out ideas, suggesting ideas, opposing ideas, got myself on the board, asked naive questions, so I functioned that way with helping to bring an HMO for the Chinese speaking in Chinatown. And for the social work profession itself, when such a plethora of agencies were founded in Chinatown, people were hired to be paraprofessionals, except they didn't have any skills. They didn't have any social work skills. So City College came up with the idea of having a 2-year course where you train people to be paraprofessionals who had at least interviewing skills, understood the principles of social work, and learn a little bit about case management. So I think I taught that course for a period of 5 years. I think we graduated 3 or 4 classes, and each class was 2 years long. I lose track of counting the time. It just, it all blurs together now. The other thing that was happening too was that the skills courses were needed at San Francisco State University in the social work department, and the Department of Human Resources, and at that time it was called the Welfare, was hiring people to be social workers in the welfare department who didn't have skills, and they were being sent to they were taking classes to get their master's degrees, and I taught the skills classes there for. I think it didn't last long. I think politics was such that my job ended and somebody else got the job. But that was okay.
Well, it sounds as though you have very great skills at spotting a need and responding to that need and following the needs as they present to you. I wonder, how is it that you recognized which of the many needs presented were the ones that you should pursue?
I don't know. I really don't know that. I certainly know that in our training, one of the principles that I took in, I remember in the group work practice, the group work skills courses, our professors would say, as you learn these skills, they get into your bones and blood, and then they're in you. They're a very part of your being. And after a while, I realized that's really true, that being a good listener and responding in an empathetic fashion then became a part of my personhood. And being aware and attuned to needs maybe is part of that same picture, that and it could be that having known want, then you are aware there's a lot of want and a lot of needs out there that aren't provided for. Yes. I guess the exciting thing is to see that finally that there were agencies in Chinatown to provide services that were never provided before or inadequately provided. And then, because there were jobs, more kids went into the field. And it gave Hong Kong immigrants opportunities too, because they had the Chinese language. That was quite a feat for me, and I think I don't think it would be immodest to say that it was quite a feat, because for an American-born person of Chinese descent to have mastered the spoken language enough to be able to do social work and to be able to converse fluently was considered a feat at that time. And people from Asia, when they listened to me talk, they asked me how long I've been here in the United States when they speak Chinese with me. And what happens is that by growing up in America, our education is in American schools, which means that we're Americanized. And then when you're a teenager, you rebel against your parents, and the more your parents try to ram down your throat your heritage and culture, the more you say, I don't want it. And we went through that too. So a lot of my peers gave up speaking Chinese and didn't retain that capability. When I went to work at Cameron House the first few years, every time I needed a word in Chinese, I would ask my client. And I would never forget that word. My nose was also always in the Chinese dictionary because I would know the concepts in English that are psychological concepts and understandings. But our vocabulary in growing up with our people is we are a people that's rather stoic. We hold our feelings in. We don't talk about it, so that we haven't even learned the words. Many of the words that describe feelings, we don't know. So I had to put my nose in the Chinese dictionary and learn those. And if I didn't know the word, I'd find somebody to tell me what that word is. During those years at Cameron House, I think I taught for at 10 years, maybe more, parent education. There was a principal at one of the schools, grammar schools in Chinatown, saying, our parents come from a culture that is adult-centered. It's not child-centered. So the child is just simply an object that you raise, and then the child is the possession of the parents. And the child-rearing methods were punitive as well. So this principal had been a social worker, and so she said she wanted me to come there and do parent education in Chinese. So that started a whole new moonlighting career in doing parent education. I went to about 9 different San Francisco Unified School Districts, grammar schools, to do parent education in Chinese and in English. And they were essentially understanding your child, listening to your child, appropriate punishment methods, appropriate how to praise without fearing that you're going to make your child overly proud and arrogant, things like that. So, and what I had to do was work out lesson plans. I wanted to give my parent students a handout that summarized the main points made each lesson. So I would write it up in Chinese and give them a handout, which meant that I had to relearn Chinese words and relearn how to write them, and write out this handout, 1-page handout to give to the students.
Somewhere I read that you were also instrumental in developing programs for first-generation Chinese-born children from immigrant families.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering how it sounds as though this relates to your own experiences.
Yeah.
And
Well,
comments on those programs?
Well, you know what it is that at that time when I was at Cameron House, I also worked with kids who were deeply in the gangs, and there was a lot of antisocial behavior. Or I worked with parents who were agonizing because their kids were in gangs. And we knew at that time that kids dropped out of middle school, high school, because they came from Asia, didn't have enough basis yet to be able to follow what's going on in their class. They were put in a class that was their age, but they didn't have the English skills or understanding. So they were dropping behind and then dropping out of school. And what do? Lots of them joined the gangs. So I came up with the idea of having a program that was a holistic approach. I went to, and by then I had gone to the grammar schools enough to teach parent education. So I had the contacts with the principals and the teachers. So what I did was Family Service Agency got funding and gave me carte blanche. So I went to the schools and I said, give me the names of your most at risk. I went to the sixth grade classes. Give me the names. Those are the kids that are about to go into middle school. Give me the names of your most at-risk kids. And so I did a program with a group of 30, 35 at-risk kids from who were going to Francisco Middle School or about to go there, and I had them come for after-school tutoring. So that meant organizing a corps of volunteers to tutor them in their homework. But then knowing that kids want to play, the promise was that you come for tutoring every day. On Friday we have club activities. And then once a month we have an evening event where you and your parents come. And we talk about parents and kids, issues that come up between them, such as how much allowance should they have? You know, how do I help them with their homework? How much television should they watch? What kind of television should they be watching? Kind of practical things that parents and kids struggle with each other over. And we would take it a step further, and we'd have family field trips. You know, we'd go into the country and pick fruit. So it was an attempt to have a holistic program.
It sounds wonderful.
Yeah. It was kind of like my idea of how families should be served.
And it sounds as if it drew on many of your experiences as a social worker.
Yeah, it did.
Going way back to your early experiences in the recreation department.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonder if we might take a short break. So,
Okay.
all right.
The next challenge I had was that Jewish family, let's see, Jewish Families and Children's Services. There was a social worker on that staff who had the dream that if we put social workers in schools, to precede these comments, by that time, that was in the early 1980s, and even before then, Proposition 13 had really reduced the amount of money schools were getting. So one of the first to go were social workers, school social workers. So there were no school social workers anymore for years and years. And I became very aware of it because when I was working at Cameron House, kids would be referred, and sometimes they showed up and sometimes they didn't. And then when I did struggle with them, it was struggling with the kid in the office. So, and if I was lucky, I got the parent. So then, when this social worker at Jewish Family and Children's Services came up with the idea, she got a grant and said, if we send social workers, and they hired 2 of us to go to schools. So I went to 3, my colleague went to 3, and we make it very clear to the faculties, we're not there to fix the kids. We're not there to do individual work. We're there to collaborate with teachers and with the principal regarding things that concern you about the school or about the kids. And she was trying to prove that this also could make a difference in the life of the school and in the life of the kids. So that project went on for 3 years. And from that project, then when it ended, one of the schools I went to, out of its own funds, hired me for at least 5 years to come as its social worker. And at that time, after discussing with her, I decided that model had a lot of merit, but I think a better model would be to collaborate with the teachers, collaborate with the principal, to look at what's going on in the whole system, to look at what's going on in the dynamic between the kid and the teacher, between the kid and other kids, and the part that the parents played in it. So what I did was I worked with the principal on systemic problems in the school, and then I worked with the teachers around kids that they couldn't handle. I brought in the parents. You know, I saw the kids individually. I formed groups with several of the kids, and had the kids impact each other. And brought feuding parents in who were divorced but feuding over the kid, brought them in, and in order to say, you know, here are some agreements you need to make. You know, this is what's happening with your child. So I felt that model of what a social worker needs to do made a lot more sense. So, and it was from having done that by then, Clarence and I were close to retirement. And out of the blue he said, I've always made the decisions and the choices of what charitable outfits we would contribute money to. You know, what would you like to do? Well, then my eyes lit up. And I said, you know, what I'd like to do is maybe, if we have enough money, do something to get social workers back into the school district. And so it was like his daring approach, our looking into what we could afford, and we realized we were frugal people. When you grew up in the Depression and when you're culturally come from a people that are frugal, we just saved and invested and put money away. So we ended up saying, we don't need all this money. And so we committed ourselves to putting $1 million into an endowment fund. And we made NASW Foundation the fiscal agent.
Amazing.
And what we did was go to the school district to find who would match a half salary. We realized that we cannot just hand over a salary, that we would have to get a commitment from the school district. And it took a little search, but we found one. And so it's the director of the school health departments. So she was willing to go half and half. By then,
That, I just have to comment that is an absolutely remarkable story.
oh, yeah, it's like,
And the power of one person to be able to make a difference for a cause to which one is really committed.
yeah, well, it was like, maybe, I think really that proves that money talks. And we realized that we could use this. And so, meanwhile, my friend Bruce and I were lobbying the superintendent. I had her over for lunch. Took several calls, but she came. And I spent the time listening to her. And then I slipped in remarks about how important social workers are. We got her assistant superintendent to come to the house. We met with I figured out who the people on the Board of Education have larger influence. I had them come over to the house for lunch. And all of these people need to talk about themselves. So that's wonderful. That's what we do. Is we listen and we are emotionally nurturing. And then we'd slip in that social workers are really, important. And we have this endowment, and we didn't need to rub that in. They knew. And so then I think Dan Kelly said, you want me to set up a meeting with the superintendent to talk about social workers? Yes. So the two of us went, and Clarence came up with a brilliant idea of saying, directly he looked at the superintendent, if we match 2 half salaries, will you match those 2 half salaries from your budget instead of from school health departments? Well, she looks at Dan Kelly, whom we had lobbied. You want me to do this, don't you? Well, don't look at me. You're the one who has to decide. So she decided. And then fortuitously, that same year, one of the supervisors of San Francisco came up with Proposition H, the school enrichment program, where he proposed legislation whereby the Board of Supervisors, out of its own budget, every year would put so much money into the school district for sports, preschool education, arts, music, that's sports, library, arts, music, first 5. And then there was a third category. We looked at it. There were social workers down at the bottom, along with plumbers and electricians, for in-kind services. Fortunately, I had a friend who was a much more politically astute man than I. We looked at that and we said, we got to get down there and talk to the guy who writes this legislation. So we just spent time with him, banging away at him until he got the point. And actually what happened was that he was new in San Francisco. He didn't know the school district. He didn't know a thing about what kids need or social work. And so, it was like talking and helping him understand. So then he said, okay. So he put us social workers finally at the top of the list and put Part E in, where that the school district may dispense funds for these services as well. Another part of that whole story is when I lobbied the Board of Education for social workers, during that one meeting, some of the school nurses showed up. They got wind that I was going to come and lobby for social workers. And they showed up and said, what about us? And I thought, that's right. It's got to be learning support. So ever since then, we lobbied and got money and support for nurses and social workers. And then I got the superintendent to put me on that Prop H committee, the group that was going to plan on how the money was going to be spent, and worked with educating that committee, found the people who would probably make a difference in how decisions were made, got to them, dealt with the big criticizer of social workers. And so now there's a half-time social worker in every grammar school in San Francisco.
Isn't that remarkable?
So we started out with 0, then 1, then 2. Oh, I forgot that part of this story is that when we went to that superintendent's office and she said, okay, she'll match 2, at the next Board of Education meeting, they wanted us there because they wanted to give us some kind of certificate, thank you. And then she presented her budget to her Board of Education. Her budget called for 10 new social workers and 10 new nurses. So it started with that, from 0 to 1 to 2 to 10, 10, 10, and then Prop H came in, and we moved from Prop H from 10 to every school now.
I can definitely see why you have been identified as an advocate.
Oh.
And it appears to be a theme that runs throughout your career.
Yeah.
That where you've seen the need, you've taken action.
Yeah.
And your action has been to join, to bring people together, to educate, to move a process along.
Yeah.
Just remarkable.
Well, and learn where the power is and work with the power.
Yes. A very powerful lesson.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes left on the tape, about 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Are there some comments you'd like to make in the last 7 minutes, things you'd like to share?
I don't know. First of all, I think that simply being the education that a social worker gets is a wonderful education. And I think the profession gives us a broader understanding of humankind. And I recognize this particularly because one of the persons that really put up a fight on the Prop H committee was a person who's an MFT. And she was yelling that social workers don't do anything, that all they do is send kids out and have meetings and so on. So she didn't understand the holistic approach, and she didn't understand the systems approach to working with people. And I think that that's what it is that that if you work with people, and if you understand social needs, that then you need to be looking at systems, because systems impact one another. Clarence put up a note for me to remind me that one of our themes in the Learning Springboard Endowment is that we wanted to emphasize that social workers particularly be in grade schools, because that's where we want to help kids and families, so in order to waylay and prevent serious development of problems later on. Because, you know, when you read about the history of the assassin at Georgia Tech, the very depressed Korean boy, he was troubled from when he was very little. And what? And I think also, yeah, Virginia, I said Georgia Tech, I meant Virginia Tech, yeah. And that's why we emphasize that. And then the Prop H committee has gone further. What it's done now is expanded the funding so that middle schools are getting funding as well for social workers and MFTs. So that's to the good, and MFTs are being asked to have a broader approach. And I think that hopefully that we can come together, you know, clasp hands and work together, MFTs and social workers.
Well, it has been wonderful talking with you today.
Oh.
And the history that you share with us is just remarkable.
Oh.
It is certainly inspirational, and I think that it promotes again the concept that the holistic approach, taking into consideration systems and the whole person, the whole system, the community. I think you started with community,
Mm-hmm.
that you grew up in a community,
Mm-hmm.
that has become so important in your own personal development and
Mm-hmm.
in your perception of the field of social work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I thank you so much.
Well, I thank you for your interest and support.
And again, I want to congratulate you on your induction into the Hall of Distinction, and say that it is an honor that is very, very well deserved.
I probably won't really be able to take it in until I don't know when, but I'm kind of like, this isn't really happening, is it?
It really is happening, and it is happening today. So, thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for spending time with me and for being interested. And we just hope that this would be useful to young people and useful to the field. Well, useful to humankind, really.